Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Amy Hennessy, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications and External Affairs for Ulupono Initiative. We're an impact investment firm working to make Hawaii more self-sufficient and resilient in local food, renewable energy, clean transportation, and better management of fresh water and waste. I'm also a proud graduate of the journalism program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa and your moderator today. Before we begin, I just want to take a quick moment to thank Farmers Insurance for their sponsorship today to allow this conversation to happen. Okay, let's dig in. We've brought together an excellent group of alumni and University of Hawaii leaders for today's Leading Women panel as part of the Wahine Forward virtual conference. Ladies, the goal of today is to get to talk story, learn more about your journeys to becoming leading women in your fields, and discussing together some of the difficulties we've faced along the way. I'd like to introduce each of you to our audience. First, we'll start with Dr. Catherine Coe. Oh, everybody's coming on. There we go. Catherine received a Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Hawaii and was the first woman to graduate in neurosurgery from UH's John A. Burns School of Medicine. Dr. Coe completed neurosurgery training at Mount Sinai Medical Center and earned a Master of Fine Art in 2012 from the Academy of Art University. Both her neurosurgery practice and art studio are located in New York City, where she's joining us today. And she is the artist in residence at the Living Museum and served as the inaugural artist in residence for the American Medical Women's Association. Thank you so much, Dr. Coe, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much. What a great event. It's an honor to be here with you, Amy, Shelley, and Dean Nelson. And I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Next, I'm going to introduce Dean Camille Nelson, who was appointed as the new dean of the UH Manoa Richardson School of Law this past August. She most recently served as the Dean of American University's Washington College of Law, and prior to that was the first woman and person of color to serve as Dean of Suffolk University Law School in Boston. Dean Nelson focuses on the intersection of critical race theory and cultural studies and has published several impactful works in Berkeley Journal of Criminal Law, Yale Journal of Law and Feminism, and more. Recently named the top 35 women in higher education by Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine, Dean Nelson has long been an outstanding member of the legal community. Dean Nelson, thank you for joining the panel and welcome back to Hawaii.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for including me.
Sure. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Shelley Kimura, who serves as the Senior Vice President of Customer Service at Hawaiian Electric, where she is responsible for the strategy and operations of customer relations and solutions, field services, and revenue management. She oversees customer energy resources, a critical component of Hawaiian Electric's strategy to achieve 100% renewables. Shelley graduated summa cum laude from the University of Hawaii at Manoa with a Bachelor of Business Administration degree and was a recipient of the Presidential Scholarship. We're thrilled you could join us today too, Shelley. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Sure. So with that, let me pull up my questions to make sure. All right, so each of you not only work in, but lead an industry or field where you could be characterized as once male dominated. At what point in your careers did you realize you could become a leader in your field rather than just a participant? Maybe let's start with Shelley.
Sure. Okay, so I think that when I think back on my career and where I'm at today, the point at which I thought I could become a leader was when I got thrown into my position about 5 years ago. I was at HEI, Hawaiian Electric's holding company, and I was focused on finance and investor relations, and I was responsible for about 8 people. And then I was asked to step into a vice president role at Hawaiian Electric Company, overseeing about 80 people. And about a few weeks into the job, we had to quickly launch a strategic plan for the next 3 years because of some other things that were going on. And I led that effort. And so I was kind of just thrown into the deep end. And that kind of leadership role wasn't really in my line of sight at that time, but it all kind of just happened. And I think at that point, I really became very committed to the mission of what we were doing with respect to clean energy and just helping to make Hawaii a better place.
Awesome. How about you, Catherine? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm just an ordinary brain surgeon, and but I managed to survive quite a long career, maintaining my interest and commitment to neurosurgery. But I think if I could shine a tiny little light, or as an example of someone who could, I had two interests, which was multiple interests, but art and neurosurgery. And I wanted to combine both and do both. And so I think if I might be able to, serve as an example to someone who is passionate about, a few things, and not to give up anything. One of the things that I've been a proponent of is in this, your one and only short life, don't leave any dream untried. And you might not fail, you might not succeed at everything, but if you love to do many things, go ahead and try it. My career has been higher for combining art in neurosurgery and taking the operating room into the art studio. I can honestly say that I carved a niche that was unique, and I'm hoping other people would follow that small path also.
That's really awesome. I know I've been inspired looking at your art. So hopefully you can maybe share your social media handles so folks can take a look at what you've been doing too and be inspired as well. Let's go to Dean Nelson. What do you think?
Thanks. I think at some point you start believing in yourself and seeing yourself the way others see you. Just quick story in terms of deaning. I'm not going to be bold enough to say that I knew what a dean did 10 years ago when I, first started doing this, because no one ever talks about deaning and frankly, what the component parts are, which are always in evolution, frankly, and it depends on the context and the time. Deaning in 2001 is very difficult than deaning now during a pandemic. Deaning after the recession is different than deaning in, good times. So I think that, I was getting nominated and I kept saying to myself, well, there aren't that many Black people deaning. Don't they see I have, dreadlocks or natural hair? Don't they know I'm an immigrant? Don't they know I'm this and that? And I had the negative talk as to why, because I didn't see very many people like me, I would not be selected, but people were nominating me. And at some point you throw your hat into the ring. And somewhere along the path, you think, wait, I could do this too, right? By virtue of not proceeding, one is almost conceding that others can do this better than you. And I had to sort of stop and sort of talk to myself the way I talk to my students and the way I talk to my kids. So, you start realizing that all the positive energy that you expend on others, we deserve to expend that on ourselves and the same level of belief. So I started doing that. And, at some point along the way, you had the opportunities started to arise in more concrete ways. And I've just been pursuing them. I like what you said, Catherine, about like not leaving those dreams, on that, at least trying to fulfill them. So that's part of my process or journey.
That's awesome. Did you have a mentor, male or female, or someone who advised you good or bad during your journey?
Me?
Yeah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've been really blessed to have, a really diverse slate of mentors. I mean, there 10 years ago, there weren't a ton of women of color deans. We've seen increased numbers, certainly over the last decade, but I benefited from the support and the sponsorship, frankly, and the mentorship of, a number of women, number of men, people of color, but largely I will say because of the demographics of deaning, probably more sort of senior white men. Yeah. And that's just how it is. I mean, the same thing when I was practicing, that's how it has been. So, I think one of the things we do as women leaders is sort of double down in our commitment to mentor and support and encourage and cheerlead for other women and people of color who are, coming up behind us, and to make sure that we're not the first and the last, right? That would be devastating and damaging and destructive. So, but I'm really fortunate. I've had great mentors.
Yeah. How about you, Catherine? What's it like in the neurosurgery world?
When I first started, I did neurosurgery training at Mount Sinai in New York City, and it was way back, I think there were 50 women in the world. It's unscientific, but, and most of them were in the United States. And so we all knew each other, and there wasn't really a template for the future on looking with mentors. So I had a few male mentors, but I have to say that, and it was challenging. I have to say that I fangirl most about Patsy Mink. And Patsy Mink, in my opinion, is going to loom large as one of the greatest American women in the 20th century. And I admire her for her courage, her co-authorship of Title IX. And I am ever so proud that she represented Hawaii and came from Hawaii. And so if there's any female that means the most to me, she's definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She is a true inspiration, that's for sure. Shelley, how about you? Have you had mentors, male or female, that have had a great impact on you?
Yeah, I've also been fortunate to have a lot of mentors, both male and female. And I think, my advice to folks is to seek out mentors, and they don't always have to be formal mentors. You can learn so much from so many different people, and it's about figuring out, well, I think one thing is understanding nobody's perfect, right? So no one's going to be that perfect role model for you, because you need to be authentically you. So looking at what people do well and figuring out how that fits into what your goals are and what your leadership style is and what your values are. And that has actually worked really well for me, and just a natural curiosity to learn about how people do things and how they got to where they've gotten to, what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them. One mentor I had in my first job, he was the managing partner of the firm that I was working for. And he was just such a great person. And he always taught us, think straight, talk straight, which I always remind myself of every day. And he also said, success is measured by the success of the people around you. And I thought that was another great philosophy and value to have in my career.
Mm-hmm. Definitely true. I've seen that in my own advice. Camille, you're the first woman to serve as the Dean of the Richardson School of Law. You've been the first of many things, including the first Black woman to clerk at the Supreme Court of Canada. Do you feel like you've had to blaze your own path forward to achieve your success? Where did you find support along the way?
I think inevitably, if in retrospect, I'd say the answer to that is yes. But at the time, you're just trying to do your best, right? I mean, I think seldom do we get to sort of pause and take stock of our work or our progress, in quotes. We're just aspiring and trying and working hard. I mean, I think so many times we're just doing and not really getting to sort of think about the theory of our journey as it was. So yes, I think with the Supreme Court, one of the things that's interesting with that experience, like others, I mean, clerking is one of the best things I think any law student or law grad can do. But there are always still people who, whatever the opportunity is, will be naysayers. So part of it is, I think we have to think, well, what do we want to do? Even if it's you're the first in a space, is this good for you and yours and your community? And sort of disregard some of the naysayers or the negative chatter, because the presumption, for example, with that opportunity was, well, if you do some of these opportunities because there's never been a Black person in the space or never been a woman in the space, well, then you're a sellout. That's the kind of thing I would hear, right? If you go to a big firm and you do corporate law in a corporate space, you're a sellout. And then again, to my earlier point, that implies that certain places are hereinafter to be homogenous and that we don't belong. So, some of the pushback has to be, yes, I'm going to blaze my own path, as it were, because I disagree with the fact that there shouldn't be women or people of color or Black people in particular, or Black women in that space. So it does take something anchoring you to move forward, despite some of the static, as it were.
Interesting. Catherine, you've had experience studying and working in both Hawaii and the mainland. Do you find your experience as a woman in Hawaii unique compared to working on the mainland, and how were they different?
I actually never practiced medicine in Hawaii. I left after I graduated. I left in New York City right away. But I went to high school in Hawaii, Kalani, and so before, after, and during high school, I had a lot of jobs. And one job that really resonated with me throughout my entire career, I used to work at the concession stand in San Susi in Waikiki. And that concession stand is still there, by the way. But this was so long ago that they hadn't invented spam musubi yet. So I'm saying, yeah, it's really a long time ago. And I was so, I was very tentative because, I was very young. And so I used to mix the orders up. I spilled the drinks on the customers, and I, mixed up all the change was always wrong. But, the local people were so kind and supportive and encouraging me. And no matter what I did wrong, and it taught me that the people that clean my operating room, the people that pass me the surgical tools, the nurses, the techs, the surgeon that stands across from me during brain surgery, they all deserve the same kind of gratitude and respect. And I think that lesson was best learned at that concession stand in Hawaii. I don't think I could have learned it better anywhere else. And so for that, it means a lot to me thinking back. And every time I go back to Hawaii, I always pass by that concession stand.
Awesome. Do you find, how is that received in New York? Are there, because New York is famously a little prickly.
So you have two choices. You could be abrupt, or you could be kind.
Mhm.
And kindness initially takes a lot longer, but in the long run, it pays off greatly. And so I chose the route that I was taught in Hawaii, the values and the ethics and the aloha spirit. And I hold fast to those attitudes. And it served me well, even in New York City.
Yeah. No, that's a great story, and I think really valuable for our folks who are tuning in. Shelley, you were honored this year as one of 3 women selected for the 2020 Girl Scouts of Hawaii Women of Distinction, an award that recognizes achievements of women who demonstrate courage, confidence, and character. When have you had to show courage in your professional life?
So if you don't mind, I want to comment on something Catherine just said, because it really resonated with me, because I think a lot of times we think that being from Hawaii is a disadvantage, and that it won't play well in whatever career we have. And I used to think that way. But throughout my career, I've learned that it's actually an asset and a differentiator we have. And when I work with others, and I've worked with teams of people from all over the world, I think the perspective that we bring, the kindness, and I think just the cohesiveness and that sense of everybody's connected and that we're a whole and we're going to do something collectively together is a real strength. And, being that we're talking to a group of University of Hawaii folks, I want people to remember that, because oftentimes I think people from Hawaii think that the better answers are elsewhere, but that's not always the case.
Totally.
So on courage, so I think, I don't know what others think, but I think being a woman, there's always these fears in the back of your head, right? And you're always thinking, well, I don't know if I can do that, or if I take that on, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that, or will people oppose me, and will I be attacked? Whatever thoughts are going through your head. And, as Camille said, you don't always see people that look like you in leadership roles. And so it's harder to imagine yourself in those roles. So I think courage plays out every day in everything we do, to just say yes, you know, or just go do it, just make it happen, and you'll figure it out along the way. And yeah, you're gonna fail sometimes, but I think it's realizing that that's okay. And you know, one example, your question was about an example. So one example I have of a time where I really had to step up. It's remembering what you stand for and doing what's right. And I once read that women often don't stand up for themselves, but when it's about other people, they find courage and they stand up. And this was one of those times. And I always go back to, you know, what is Pono? When I have to make difficult decisions, what is Pono? What is the right thing to do? And someone once told me, always act and make decisions as if your children are watching. And that really makes it real. And so I had to make a tough decision that many people wouldn't understand, and probably to this day might not understand. And it was very public. Amy, you might remember, but we had to cancel 3 large renewable solar projects several years ago. Yep. And people thought it was because we're against renewables, but that really wasn't the case. These projects were going into bankruptcy. People thought we were making excuses. They actually did go into bankruptcy, and we were trying to protect the project so they could continue in another form with another owner. And that's actually what happened. But we were ridiculed. There was, you know, op-eds about us in panels. People were criticizing us, and we had to, you know, stand up and say, this is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I do remember that. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to shift the conversation just a little bit, and maybe I'll start with Catherine, just because I haven't given you the first hit on a question yet. Have you seen the world change in light of the Me Too movement? Have any of your experiences in your professional life changed in the last few years as a result?
Well, you know, when, so, you know, during residency, which is so long ago, the dialogue of gender discrimination, micro inequities, that those words didn't exist. It took a while before they permeated into the milieu. And so during residency, when you had a hard, challenging situation, you always thought who I could turn to. And a lot of times it was nobody. So after many years, I've been in practice a long time, the people that have helped me the most are the women neurosurgeons. And I can honestly say that some of my best friends are female neurosurgeons. A lot of people, some people will write to me on Instagram, and they're younger, and they say, you know, they're interested in medicine, and they say, I want to be like you. And so I say, oh, that you know, how sweet, and nice, but no, you don't want to be like me. You want to be better than me. And when you pass me, I'm going to be your biggest fan. And so for me too, I think the idea is we can't all be the vice president. We can't all be the general manager of a baseball team, but we can all be the supporters pushing those females forward, because, you know, if 1 or 2 of us break through, then collectively we all move forward. And so I've always been the type of woman that celebrates somebody who's better than me. I admire that. And I think that's one of the things that came out of me too, is the collective hand-holding amongst women.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Camille, how about you? Have you seen any difference?
So yes and no, in the sense that I can't parse how much of it is because I'm aging, for example. Yeah. So, you know, having been in the academy, the legal academy, since, you know, 2000-ish, and doing my grad work actually in New York before that, there are a lot of things that were far more overt, right? Even if people would purport to be joking around, and if you took offense, you were just sensitive, overly sensitive. Come on, can't you take a joke? Or I didn't mean anything by it. Or, well, it's because you look so good. That kind of thing. Like, I'm giving you a compliment. And I think there's been an evolution and a progression for it, insofar as people understand more that there are lines And I think especially in some of the professions like law and like all of ours that tend to be more male dominated, that conversation has been one that since the Me Too movement has really gained added traction. I think what happens, like in other areas, is the nature of the assault or the abuse or the inappropriate comment sort of morphs. It doesn't disappear entirely, but it morphs and it becomes more, I think, undercover in a sense, or more implicit as opposed to explicit. So because there are more guardrails up. I also think for me, as I mentioned, in terms of, being in my 20s versus being in my 50s, I can't tell entirely how much of that is just, I'm different, and therefore the nature of the challenges around sexism and inappropriate behavior are therefore different, or start to morph and take on different dimensions. What I will say is there were some pretty egregious things that happened, and finding your voice in those spaces is sometimes really hard, but also really important, and supporting each other as women and sometimes men as well in these spaces. And that's the conversation I think we have to continue to have as well. How do we support each other as we insist on this conduct and this language and this, sort of type these assaults being a thing of the past?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because I think what happens is people opt out, right? People get so weathered and worn down that we're going to lose talent if we don't, and excellent women, if we don't how to do better.
Yep. Yep. Shelley, how about you? Have you had any experience, or is it similar? It's just sort of part of how things are.
Yeah, well, so my personal experience, I haven't had those kinds of experiences, none that I can remember or stand out. But I think, being asked the question made me reflect on it to think about what I was thinking about as it was happening, and as I saw this uprising of women. And at the time, it was very empowering as a woman to see everybody coming together to support themselves and their voices being heard, and the power shift happening. And I think that, it's hard to know, cause and effect, but I think that's playing into this just broader power shift, where it becomes harder and harder for those kinds of things to happen. Which is positive for everybody. And I have 2 daughters, and so I think about what that means for them. Personally, I think that perhaps I didn't go through that because I've often, for most of my career, I worked for a company that was led by a woman, by Connie Lau. And so again, it's a power thing, right? And she's setting the tone at the top for the entire organization. And I think that probably plays into it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think having a female lead would definitely change the tenor of how the organization operates. I think it's so interesting to think about the impacts and noticing how some of your male colleagues maybe are more measured in their interactions than they might have been previously.
I do notice that. So, I think that there's like anything else, there's good people, there's those that are not so great, and those that, are in the middle. And I think that because of what's happened, I think there's men that are good people, but they're just so nervous about where is that line, and they're probably not crossing the line at all, but they think that they might be. And so they have to, kind of hold back when they're interacting with women. And just from a professional perspective, I think sometimes that can be tough when you're trying to get things done, when you're trying to build teams and relationships and trust, which is so important in getting things done.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of you come from male-dominated industries. I know I feel it in the investment world. Was there ever a time that you thought about leaving your industry? And if you did, what was the reason for that? Maybe we'll start with, we'll go with Camille.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you know, and I think it would be a lie to say I've never thought about it. I think along two trajectories. One, in baby dean school, as I like to call it, back in the day, we would all be invited to Jackson Hole upon receiving a decanal position, and we had this intensive workshop in this beautiful space, and senior deans and university presidents and provosts and the practitioners, largely deans though, came and spoke to us. And I'll never forget, one of the deans, who is now a university president, said, you have to know the lines over which you will not cross, even if someone is pushing you to cross the line. And that always stuck with me, because there are sometimes these moments where your conscience is alight and you're like, I'm not going to participate in this. I will not be a part of this. I need to be able to live with myself, and to the point, show my face to my family. And I want to be, right? I want to be a good person, right? So I think that's one thing. I also think sometimes, again, going back to this, allowing yourself to dream, which sometimes we don't, especially now. I think you're in a certain role, you sort of think, well, what would I do if I could do anything?
Mhm.
And allowing yourself to actually think that is incredibly provocative and evocative, because then what inevitably comes is like, well, but how would I do that? Or I can't do that, or I don't have that degree, or but I don't, you know what I mean? And if you, then you talk yourself out of things. So sometimes I think just allowing yourself in a moment to dream allows you to think about, well, what else might there be? So sometimes I allow myself to do that, you know? So that's the answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. Which makes me think of Catherine. Obviously, I would transition to you because you have taken a bit of that leap going into the art world, and so I'm curious, like how have you thought through that, and are there other things that you thought you might want to do?
Well, you know, in my neurosurgical career, I was pretty much mid-career when I kind of felt something was missing. And I wasn't going to leave the field, but I had a dissatisfaction. And for some reason, I went, unbeknownst to me, I hadn't ever drawn or painted before, but I took it up. And art gave me something that I didn't even know I needed, but I needed it desperately. And by going into art, which I thought would be kind of ridiculed by my colleagues in neurosurgery, the other brain surgeons. So I didn't tell them for a long time. I just hid it. And then when I graduated with my master's degree in figurative representational painting, gradually my art came out because I combined my art with neurosurgery. So if you can do some kind of a unique thing like that, it actually elevates your primary career. And nobody really laughed. They kind of, I was very surprised at the way my colleagues kind of rallied around and supported me. And so sometimes, you know, when you take a leap of faith going way out of your comfort zone, it actually brings you back to your circle in a better way than when you started.
Mhm. Yeah, now it reminds me, there's another University of Hawaii graduate, another strong woman, Patrice Tanaka, who also lives in New York. And she has I think she's just retired actually from her career in public relations, but she sought ballroom dancing as a way of her creative outlet, and she actually wrote a book about becoming Ginger Rogers and her journey about stress relief and all of the things that went along with it. So lots of parallels there. Shelley, how about you? And ever want to do anything else?
Well, early in my career, I did, and so I actually made a change. So I got my degree in accounting. I became a CPA, and I did that work for about 8 years, working at a firm. And during that time, I got into consulting and working primarily at Kamehameha schools. And through that work, I realized the importance of being more directly linked to something like a bigger mission. And through that, I moved away from being a CPA and moved into other things. So I think that you should never be afraid to make a change. And I tell my kids, you have to do what you enjoy, because otherwise it's going to seem like work every day. But if you enjoy it, then your work isn't work. It's kind of a life's purpose.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh, goodness. So, Catherine, I have a question for you, but I feel like we've kind of already talked about it. But if you want to go a little bit deeper into, how the left and the right sides of the brain work in tandem with science, and how seemingly conflicting ideas can work together, but be cohesive. How does that resonate in your experience?
I've always been attracted to unusual thinkers, those people that are a little bit outside the clique, because I think, and who are kind of like observers, and they're not really in the clique, but they're there. And they oftentimes have unique solutions to problems. If you have a different background and you come to a field like neurosurgery, I can often use my art skills to solve a problem in the operating room, and I can use my neurosurgical skills to solve something in the art studio. But I think a really good example of somebody who's using diverse skills is Shelley, because, for example, she has energy management background, administrative background. She helps run a large company, and she's also, in case people don't know, a fantastic public speaker. So she's managed to combine diverse talents, and probably her career will be never ending, because she takes these type of backgrounds and puts it all together in one person. Something I really admire.
Yeah, I totally agree. Shelley's pretty amazing. So, I think I'm just curious, in one word, how would you describe each of your journeys to becoming a leading woman in your profession? Maybe we'll go with Shelley, since she's embarrassed.
Embarrassed. Purpose driven. So what I just talked about earlier, that if you follow what you think is right, and if you follow what you think your purpose is, then you're always going to make the right decisions wherever life takes you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say that, I think I said it earlier, that I didn't set my sights on a certain position or, achieving a certain role in the company. It kind of just happened because of what I wanted to do for Hawaii.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My kids, really.
Yeah. How about you, Camille? What do you think? What's your one word?
Envisioning.
And why is that?
So I think to a certain extent, you have to think about what might be possible, even if you don't see it and you don't know it to exist where you want it to be,
Mm-hmm.
and be flexible and nimble enough to sort of pursue the opportunities, even if they might seem serpentine. Because I think sometimes all of those steps to the side, and then one step forward, and maybe two steps back, and then six way this way, at the end of the day, you sort of realize the ways in which all of that completes your possibility to advance in certain spaces. And you might not understand at the time, like organizational behavior. I remember taking this class in undergrad and thinking, this is an interesting class. And we had to take it in my administrative, my sort of business course diploma. And in this degree program, I was like, well, this is an interesting thing. That's a bit of psychology, a bit of HR, a bit of law and compliance, a bit of pure business, a bit of accounting. This is an odd, I use this every day. Right? I mean, they're just like stats. Why do I have to take so many stats classes? Right? Standard deviation makes it right. It's just sometimes you have these moments but wine tasting classes, which I love tasting, wine appreciation, and I love taking them. And it all comes together at a certain point. And you think, that's why I had that experience, or that's why I had that opportunity, or that's why that person came into my life. And sometimes you fight it. But at the end of the day, if you're sort of envisioning something greater, sometimes those pieces fit together in the puzzle in really positive and affirming ways.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. I love your energy too. So great. How about you, Camille? I'm sorry, Catherine.
I really like Dean Nelson's answer there. That really touched me. I think for me, what's brought me the biggest joy is creativity. and it's also my best tool. I think creative thinking can solve most problems in science and art, medicine and art also. And frankly, I can't live without it.
Yeah. I think for me, I was thinking about this, like, how would I answer? And I think I would say collaboration or collaborative, because I feel like I'm only as good as the people who are around me, and the way that we can come together to solve problems and move things forward. So that I just throw that into the mix. So let's see, we're coming up on, we have about 15 more minutes. So I think at this time we can open it up to some audience questions if we have any. And is there, I mean, while we're looking for those, is there anything that has come to mind while we're talking that any of you might want to share? Any questions you might have?
Can I just add, first of all, I think I just am so fortunate to be on the panel with these phenomenal women. And one of the things I think it's important for people to understand that I'm increasingly understanding as I sort of probably have more years behind me than in front of me is all of those positions or jobs that might not seem ideal or the dream opportunity at the time. Sometimes like 2 decades later, 3 decades later, you're like, oh my gosh, that was so formative, right? I worked in housekeeping when I was in high school, and I remember being like, why is the one Black kid have to work in housekeeping when my fellow students all got the rec jobs at the same hospital or whatever, right? And I remember being like, I know why this is, but by the same token, it was one of the best jobs in terms of being formative of my personality and building an incredible respect, especially now, for those people keeping our spaces and places clean and hygienic. And right, I mean, I have such reverence for that work that I'm like the person who, when I go into a space, like re-cleans it. Do you know what I mean? But like, never underestimate how that will impact your ability to lead and your respect for everybody doing essential work in different spaces, right? To the point that was made earlier, like every enterprise has these weird hierarchies, but everybody is doing crucial work for the enterprise. Yeah. So part of our job as leaders is to embrace everybody. Because I tell you, when I was in elementary school, our custodial staff went on strike, and that place was a disaster within 2 days, right? Yeah. Like, they're necessary. They're needed. And we have to make sure that we as leaders value everybody and see everybody and respect everybody. So I just think sometimes, that time at that point, I remember in grade 11, just being so upset at grade 12. But you know what? I'm so glad I had that opportunity in those summers to do that work with that wonderful team of people. They taught me so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to see some questions come in from the audience. So this is exciting. Wanted to throw this out first. Can you recall any negative times in your careers where you were made to feel less than your male counterparts? And how did you deal with that? I don't know who wants to go first on that one. Maybe Catherine?
Well, the one of the things about surgery is that it's a physical thing, right? It's a physical, sport. You have to be, sort of nimble, and and so, when I started in the tools didn't really work, and because they're made for guys who are, 6 feet, larger hands, and so there was a little bit of an adjustment there. But I was reading Twitter the other day, and one woman mentioned that she was told how to hold one of the, it's called a needle holder, and she was told the male way to hold it. And so she'd been training and training and training on it. And then she for hours, only to find out accidentally that wasn't the correct way to hold it. And so I wrote to her and I said, next time ask a woman surgeon, then you'll get the answer right away. So yeah, there was like a little bit of a lot of learning curve with surgical training in general. Nowadays it's a little bit better, but back then, we were really cutting new ground. It's like, it's like a tennis player, a woman tennis player playing tennis with a male racket. It's the same kind of obstacles that you have to overcome. And back then you had to figure it out by yourself.
Shelley, how about you? Any resistance?
Um, I think all the time. I think that, you know, because of the society we live in, and, you know, we talked about it earlier, there's a shift happening, which I think is really great. But walking into a room as a woman versus walking into a room as a man comes with different expectations and biases. So I think it's just, we often have a steeper hill to climb when we're trying to get something done or get a point across or getting support for something. And in terms of what I do about it, I think it's just grit. You just gotta keep going, you know, and have that mindset of, I'm just gonna prove them wrong, you know. You just keep going.
Yeah. Camille, how about you?
Yeah, I think it means we do end up working harder and smarter in many instances because we're also working on this other level, which is navigating identity, right? And and our identities are complex and intersecting just like everybody else's, right? But it's an added dynamic of work to manage other people's perspective of us. And then frankly, to not make them feel bad about their missteps around it, right? Because that doesn't help. So quick examples. I remember when I was in Boston, and despite the fact that, you know, these positions are announced in the newspaper and you know, the sort of legal press and the, you know, the Post, et cetera, you know, I'd walk into a space and I'd be with like my team and half men, half women, mainly all white. And everybody would be like, you know, shaking all the guys' hands first, Dean, 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 and then shaking in the white and Dean, Dean. And they'd be like, no, her. You know what I mean? And then I'd make a joke or something, you know what I mean? And to try to put the people who had made the mistake at ease, because I didn't want them to feel bad. And then I didn't want it to be awkward. And we were in this, you know, alumni event or something else. Like, so I had to make them feel better about their assumptions that were gendered and raced because I wanted them to have a good night. But that's more work, right? To be on your feet, sort of responding and managing and embracing at the same time, despite the fact that you know why that happened. The other thing is, I think, you know, in terms of what to do about it in the boardroom or in meetings, one of the things that really miffs me is the sort of mansplaining or the talking over people or the not acknowledging when a woman just said something and then it's a guy says it like 10 minutes later and everybody's like, oh, gee, yeah, I never thought of that's really smart. And it's like, are you having this out of body experience? Like, she just said that, or I just said that. How come you couldn't hear it when I said it, or when Shelley said it, or when Catherine said it? So I've taken to just saying, yeah, I mean, when Catherine mentioned that a couple of minutes ago, I also thought that was a really important intervention. And we should really think about that and following up on what Shelley said, because I think that really cuts to the heart of the matter and will bring the students in a more holistic way or something. Like, I'm trying to recognize and support and let the women know that I heard that they said it first. And sort of validate their existence, because what happens in those moments is you start to doubt yourself. Yeah. Like you start to think like, what is it about me that is preventing my being heard? Am I not articulate? Am I not eloquent? Am I not clear? Am I not getting it? And I want to make sure that they understand that they were heard, but there's something else operating. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so important.
I completely agree with you. And I'm smiling because I had this conversation with some other women maybe a year ago about the importance of being an advocate for other women in the room and making sure their voices are heard. And as we get into leadership positions, recognizing that we are now in a position to help make sure that that's happening. Yeah. And Catherine was a great example of that earlier, where she's giving me kudos, which I don't deserve, but she's trying to lift up other women, right? And that women often aren't gonna compliment themselves or toot their own horn, and other women can do that for them.
Yeah. So we've had a question come in that I think would be really interesting for this group to discuss. We're all experiencing COVID together. Obviously, we're all here virtually instead of in a room, which creates opportunity. But also, you know, I think we're all being impacted differently and individually. So how do the panelists think we can get through the current trauma we're experiencing and longer term recovery? I don't know, maybe we'll start with Catherine on that one.
I wrote a piece called The Incredible Lightness of Breathing. And it's in, if you Google it, you'll find it. It was and I wrote it, I got during COVID in March, I got sort of marooned in Hawaii, which was absolutely the best place to be. I was there on a vacation. I just couldn't come back to New York. The flights were gone. But it was a meditative piece on what it's like to have your life the world's life actually come to a standstill. And so I think it was a really good time to turn inward. Of course, grieving my colleagues who are on the front line, all that was going on in New York City and in the rest of the world. But I think for me, I settled a few things internally, and hopefully I can use some of that time and thought and clarity to carry myself through the remainder of my career, which is almost over, and my art career, which is going to go full steam ahead after that. And so I think it helps settle a few things with me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How about you, Dean Nelson? You're having to manage students and classes and all kinds of craziness in addition to your family life. How is that?
So I'm going to read a quote that I love from Audre Lorde, and I often refer to this to ground myself, but also to hopefully help others. Quote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare," end quote. So obviously, there's an ideological bent to the work that needs to be done there, but I want to center the self-care. I'm a big fan and believer in mindfulness, and I know that can be defined individually, but I do think it's important. Catherine mentioned breath. I do think it's important, especially now, to acknowledge that these times are trying, and I think it's doubtful that any of us are performing optimally in all our aspects of our lives. And to allow for that, like to recognize that, how could we be highly functional or as functional as we were last November now? And to give ourselves the time and the permission to do what we need to do to heal and to go forward in the space, so we can take care of our families and work well with our staff and our teams. But I think we have to acknowledge that we too need care. So I think the frame of well-being and wellness has to be elevated, and that's something we're trying to do at the law school intentionally around wellness and mental health. I think for too long, mental health has been sort of stigmatized and cast to the side, especially in the legal profession, as not sort of real. But like, if we had a heart issue, we know we need to deal with, get expert help. But I think there's a way in which we now know mental health and wellness has to be an essential part of being holistically whole for us to not just survive, but hopefully to thrive and hopefully come through stronger and healthier in a more holistic way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. We've got 3 minutes left. So Shelley, I'll take it to you.
Okay. Completely agree with what you folks just said. And I think this is it affects everybody differently. And I think that it's an actual opportunity for us to evaluate our lives both individually, but also as humanity. And the whole world is going through the same thing at the same time. And what we can decide what we want to come out of this. And I think it really makes you think about what are the most important things, that time of reflection to figure out what is most important. And that we've all been racing all this time. And COVID has allowed us to, and there's a lot of tragic things about it, don't get me wrong, but it has allowed us to slow down a little bit in some cases and figure out what is it that we want to do coming out of this, and what do we want the world to look like? What do I want my life to look like coming out of this? And I think if we do that collectively, hopefully we come up with the right answers and recognize that we have to be doing it together. And some people, you know, are doing okay during this time, some people are not, but it's how do we collectively help each other get through it.
No, that's really powerful. And I just want to, we're out of time. So there's so many great questions that were coming in the chat. I'm sorry we can't get to them all, but this has been such an inspiring conversation. And thank you for letting me be a part of it. Hopefully lead this conversation down a good path. And hope that it's been valuable for everyone who's tuned in, and just mahalo for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great job, Amy. Thank you. Such an honor to be in the panel with you all.
I feel the same way.
Nice meeting all of you.
Stay safe.